Subscribe if you dare. Like if your pulse is already climbing. Comment what you think happens next, because once this door closes, there's no turning back. The sirens arrived late, slicing through the cold Colorado night like knives. By the time the convoy reached the outer perimeter, the damage was already done. Floodlights washed the desert pale as bone, illuminating razor wire that glimmered like frost. Inside the walls of ADX Florence, America's most secure prison, silence ruled. It always did. But tonight, silence was screaming. At 2:17 a.m., an inmate vanished. Not transferred, not hospitalized, not dead, at least. Not officially, just gone. The disappearance triggered a lockdown so absolute it felt biblical. Steel doors sealed with hydraulic finality. Cameras froze on redundant loops. Guards stood motionless, counting breaths. Somewhere deep inside the facility, a cell designed to erase a human presence had failed at its only job. Warden Elias Crow watched the feeds from the control room, his jaw clenched so tight it trembled. ADX Florence did not lose inmates. It absorbed them, broke them down into routines and rules and the quiet hum of air vents. Men came here to disappear from the world, but they did not disappear from the prison. Until now. The missing man was inmate D3391. Name, Marcus Hale. Convicted federal terrorist. Life without parole. 17 years in solitary confinement. No disciplinary write-ups in the last decade. No visitors. No phone calls. A ghost who had learned how to behave like a shadow. And shadows, Crow knew, were dangerous. Special Agent Claire Donovan arrived before dawn, her badge still warm from the drive. She'd seen prisons before, state lockups, county jails, overseas detention centers, but ADX Florence felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, as if sound had weight and was being crushed under concrete. She passed through 3 checkpoints without a word exchanged. Here, conversation was a liability. They led her to the cell. Cell 180 looked exactly as it should have. Narrow bed bolted to the floor, stainless steel sink, toilet without a seat, a slit of frosted glass for light that never truly reached the corners. No loose items, no tools, no blood, no struggle. The guards swore Hale had been inside at count. Cameras showed him standing at the back of the cell, hands folded, head bowed. Then, at 1:52 a.m., the feed glitched, just half a second of static. When it came back, the cell was empty. Claire crouched, fingertips grazing the concrete. She noticed something the guards hadn't mentioned, a faint scuff near the drain. Not a footprint, more like a deliberate smear, as if someone had dragged something heavy across the floor, or wiped something away. Has maintenance checked the plumbing? She asked. The lieutenant shook his head. Nothing connects. Each cell is sealed. Nothing connects, she repeated. That's what scares me. Marcus Hale's fall read like a checklist of contradictions. Brilliant and disciplined, violent and restrained. He had orchestrated bombings without ever touching a detonator. Convinced followers to die for causes he never named. When he was arrested, he smiled. In court, he apologized not for the crimes, but for the inconvenience. Claire had interrogated men like him before. They were planners. They did not improvise. If Hale was gone, it wasn't an accident. It was a design. As the investigation unfolded, the prison's perfect order began to fray. A guard admitted he'd heard something unusual during the night shift. Not a sound, exactly, but the absence of one. The vents, normally a steady whisper, had gone dead for 30 seconds. Another guard reported a maintenance alert that cleared itself before he could log it. Then there was the notebook, hidden inside the hollow spine of a prison-issued Bible. Found during a sweep of Hale's property, the pages were filled with tight, precise handwriting. Not plans, not confessions, lists, dates, times, names. Some belonged to inmates in other wings, some to guards. One to a civilian contractor, and one underlined twice to a woman named Claire Donovan. Her stomach tightened when she saw it. I've never met him, she said, too quickly. Warden Crow studied her, his eyes sharp. He knew you were coming, by noon. Word of the disappearance had reached Washington. Calls poured in, orders conflicted. Keep it quiet, find him fast, do not let this leak. ADX Florence was a symbol. If it cracked, the world would notice. Claire walked the corridors alone, Listening to the silence press against her ears, inmates watched through narrow slits, eyes following her like needles. Somewhere behind those doors were men who would kill for a whisper of chaos. If Hale had escaped or worse, been helped, the consequences were unimaginable. She stopped at the end of D block, where the walls seemed thicker, the lights dimmer, an old section, decommissioned. They'd said, storage and utilities now, nothing to see, except the door. It wasn't on the map. No number. Just steel, flush with the wall, painted the same institutional gray. The kind of door you stop noticing after years of walking past it. The kind of door that relied on being forgotten. Claire called for Crow. The warden arrived with a small team, keys jangling like a challenge. He hesitated before unlocking it, a rare crack in his composure. This area was sealed after an incident, he said. What incident? Claire asked. Crow didn't answer. The lock turned with a reluctant groan. The door opened inward, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The air that rushed out was cold and stale, carrying a smell that didn't belong in a place obsessed with control. Paper, old paper. They descended carefully, flashlights cutting thin cones through the dark. At the bottom was a room no larger than a classroom. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A desk sat in the center, dust disturbed recently. On the desk lay a single folder, open, waiting. Inside were transcripts, interview logs, psychological assessments stamped confidential. Names Claire recognized and some she didn't. At the top of the stack was a familiar one, Marcus Hale, but the date on the last report made her breath catch. It was from 3 weeks ago, and it listed his status not as incarcerated, but as asset. As the realization settled in, the lights flickered overhead. Somewhere above them, deep within the prison, a low alarm began to sound, slow, deliberate, and mistakable. And Claire understood, with chilling clarity, that Marcus Hale hadn't escaped ADX Florence. He'd been removed. And whatever deal had been made in the silence, it was still very much alive. The alarm did not blare. It pulsed slow, methodical, almost polite. A sound designed not to panic, but to warn. In ADX Florence, panic was inefficient. Fear was controlled. Claire Donovan stood frozen in the underground records room, the word asset burning into her thoughts. Warden Crow shut the folder with deliberate calm, but his hand lingered on the cover as if it might bite back. Who authorized this? Claire demanded. Crow exhaled through his nose. People who don't put their names on paper. The stairwell lights snapped to red, somewhere above them. Steel doors began sealing wing by wing, a full internal lockdown, not protocol for a missing inmate, protocol for a breach. Claire's radio crackled. Control to Warden Crow. We've lost 2 guards from D block. Last seen heading toward the old utility corridor. Claire felt the room tilt. 2 guards. Missing, just like Hale. Were they on the list? She asked. Crow didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, one of them was. They moved fast. The stairwell echoed with boots and clipped breathing. As they emerged into the corridor, the air felt different, thicker, charged. The silence here wasn't passive anymore. It was listening. The utility corridor had been officially closed for years, rerouted during a renovation that never quite finished. It was the kind of place institutions forgot, buried under newer layers of concrete and policy, the kind of place a man like Marcus Hale would remember. They found the first guard near a junction where pipes disappeared into the walls. His body was slumped against the concrete, eyes open. Expression startled rather than terrified. No blood, no visible wounds. Claire knelt beside him, checking for signs of life. Nothing. Cardiac arrest, one of the officers suggested. Claire shook her head. Look at his hands. They were clenched tight, fingernails cracked and bleeding, as if he'd been gripping something invisible, or fighting an enemy no one else could see. The second guard was farther down the corridor, alive, barely. He was shaking uncontrollably, pupils blown wide, lips trembling around words he couldn't quite form. Hale, he finally whispered. He knew my name. Claire crouched in front of him. What did he say? The guard swallowed hard. He said the silence was over. Before Claire could press further, medics rushed in and pulled the man away. But the words stayed, echoing louder than any alarm. Back in the control room, the situation unraveled quickly. Camera feeds showed gaps, seconds of static in places that should have been impossible to access, doors opening without logs. Systems responding to commands that appeared to come from inside the prison's own network. It's like the building is letting him move, Claire said. Crow rubbed his temples. ADX Florence was designed to isolate, but isolation creates blind spots. Hale learned them. Claire's phone buzzed. A secure message from an enlisted number. "You're looking in the wrong place." Her pulse spiked. She didn't tell Crow. Not yet. Instead, she asked for Hale's interrogation history. Not the public record, the sealed files. The ones marked eyes only. What she found made her blood run cold. Marcus Hale had never stopped talking after his conviction. He'd been debriefed repeatedly by federal intelligence, not for his crimes, but for what he knew: networks, funding channels, sleeper cells. He provided information in fragments, just enough to stay valuable, never enough to be done. 3 months ago, those debriefings resumed, and officially, they weren't happening in interrogation rooms. They were happening in his cell. He was running an operation from solitary confinement, Claire said, stunned. Crow nodded grimly. Through patterns, through routines. Guards, contractors, maintenance schedules. He turned the prison into a message board. The realization hit her like a punch. Hale hadn't escaped because he was desperate. He'd escaped because he was finished using the prison. Another alert flashed across the screen. Maintenance hatch 1 that supposedly led nowhere had been opened. They followed it to a section beneath the infirmary. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. The hatch led to a crawl space barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, they found evidence of movement, scratches on the concrete, a discarded prison-issued blanket, twisted into a rope, and taped to the wall, a scrap of paper, a map. Not of the prison but of the surrounding area. Routes, timings, a rendezvous point marked with a simple symbol, a circle crossed through with a line. Claire recognized it immediately. Her phone buzzed again. "You were always part of this." She stepped back, heart hammering. "Warden, we need to lock down external access, now." Before Crow could respond, the power dipped. Just for a second. Enough for every screen to go black. When they came back on, one feed showed something new. The infirmary. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, back to the camera. Tall.com. Wearing a guard's uniform that didn't quite fit. Marcus Hale turned slowly, as if he knew he was being watched. He raised his hand not in greeting, but in acknowledgement. Then he vanished off screen. Panic rippled through the room. Orders were shouted. Teams mobilized. But Claire felt a different fear settling in her chest. Hale wasn't running. He was moving with purpose. "He's heading somewhere specific," she said. "He wants to be seen." Her phone vibrated a third time. Check the visitor logs. They did, and what they found rewrote the case. Over the past 6 months, one civilian consultant had accessed ADX Florence more than anyone else. Cleared, trusted, invisible. Name: Dr. Samuel Reeve. Criminal psychologist, Claire's former mentor. The man who had taught her how predators think. The man who had taught Marcus Hale how investigators do. Claire stared at the screen as the final message appeared. "I told you silence was a weapon. Now watch what happens when it's taken away." Somewhere inside the most secure prison on Earth, Marcus Hale was free. And the people who helped him were closer than Claire ever imagined. The prison did not feel secure anymore. It felt hunted. ADX Florence hummed with restrained chaos as tactical teams swept corridors that had never known pursuit. Every locked door now felt like a suggestion. Every shadow felt intentional. Marcus Hale had turned the prison's greatest strength, silence, into a weapon, and now it was echoing. Claire Donovan stood in the command center, staring at Dr. Samuel Reeve's personnel photo. The calm eyes, the slight smile. The man who had taught her how criminals hid in plain sight. "He's still inside," Claire said. Reeve wouldn't risk extraction unless Hale was already clear. Warden Crow nodded. "We've sealed all exits. Nothing leaves this facility without us knowing." Claire didn't argue. Hale had already proven how little that meant. Another feed flickered to life. Storage wing, see a motion sensor triggered where no motion should exist. Image sharpened. revealing Dr. Reeves standing alone beneath fluorescent lights, hands folded behind his back. Waiting. He wants to talk, Crow said. No, Claire replied quietly. He wants to finish the lesson. They reached Reeve minutes later. He didn't resist. Didn't even flinch when rifles were raised. You always were a good student, Claire, he said, voice calm, almost warm. You just hated the answers. Where is he? Claire demanded. Reeve smiled. You're still asking the wrong question. In the interrogation room, the silence was deliberate. Reeve sat straight-backed, composed, as if this were a lecture hall instead of a prison that was tearing itself apart. You helped him, Claire said. You turned an inmate into an asset. I refined a resource, Reeve corrected. Marcus Hale understands systems, power, control. You lock a man in silence long enough, he either breaks or he learns how to listen. He killed people, Claire snapped. Yes, Reeve said evenly. And so has every system that pretends isolation is justice. Claire leaned forward. Where is he? Reeve's eyes flickered. Just for a moment. He's where he's most effective. The alarms cut out completely. Not a failure. A command. Lights dimmed across the facility. Doors unlocked in sequence. Not randomly, strategically. Crow's voice crackled over the radio, sharp with disbelief. He's triggering protocols from inside the system. He has root access. Claire understood then. Hale hadn't needed to escape ADX Florence. He had become it. The first explosion wasn't loud. Was precise. A controlled breach in an outer utility tunnel far enough from the walls to avoid detection, close enough to create a blind spot. Smoke poured into the desert air as emergency teams scrambled, attention pulled outward like a sleight of hand. Inside, Hale moved. He appeared on camera feeds one by one, always just out of reach. Passing through corridors. Pausing to look directly into lenses. Calm. Why show yourself? Claire whispered. Her phone vibrated one last time. Because you need to see me go. They tracked his path to the old intake wing, the first place inmates saw when they arrived. The symbolic heart of the prison. Marcus Hale looked older than his fall photos. Thinner, sharper, but his eyes burned with quiet clarity. You're early, he said. Claire raised her weapon. It's over. Hale smiled faintly. That's what they always think. Behind him. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, hands raised. Marcus, he said softly. This was never meant to be public. Hale turned. Disappointment crossing his face. You promised evolution, he said, not containment. Reeves' voice trembled. You've proven the point. Now let it end. Hale regarded him for a long moment. Then nodded once. The gunshot echoed like a crack in the world. Reeve fell without a sound. Claire froze, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her lungs. Hale dropped the weapon and spread his hands. You see, he said. Silence is only powerful when people agree to keep it. Tactical teams flooded the wing. Hale didn't resist as they cuffed him, didn't struggle as they dragged him away. He met Claire's gaze one last time. You should read the files they'll bury, he said. The ones with your name on them. Hours later, the prison was sealed again. The official report stated that Marcus Hale had attempted escape, that an internal breach was neutralized, that Dr. Samuel Reeve acted alone and paid the price. Marcus Hale was pronounced dead during transfer, buried quietly, case closed. 3 months passed. Claire sat alone in her apartment, a thick envelope spread open on the table. No return address. Inside were documents stamped classified, interrogation logs, authorization memos, surveillance transcripts, all approving Hale's use as an intelligence asset. All signed by people still in power. At the bottom of the stack was a single photograph. Security camera still from a European train station. The timestamp was 2 days old. A man stood on the platform, back turned, coat collar raised. As the camera caught his face in profile, there was no mistaking him. Marcus Hale. Live. Watching. Claire's phone buzzed. A final message appeared. Silence was never the prison. IT was the agreement. The screen went dark. And somewhere in the world, the next system began to listen. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe before the silence finds you.